Yeah, thank you. So I must apologize to you all, and especially to the organizers. I was supposed to talk about auditory attention decoding, and at the last minute, I sort of weaseled out of my obligations to talk about that. Partly because we've had some amazing talks during the week, and essentially everything that I could have said would have been some hand-waving version of what was already said. And I know that Nima's talk is going to be the apotheosis of the workshop. And I mean, there wasn't much that I could say that I could really add to that. So instead, I'm going to be talking about something. Yeah, another motivation for talking about this is that there was a lot of discussion of memory-related issues like temporal integration and LLMs and recurrent networks that essentially involve storage of past information. So so the title of my talk is Graceful Forgetting, a Theory of Memory. So what I mean by memory is, hey, how come this? So I have to do this, yeah. So what I mean by memory is human memory, but also what I'm going to say applies to other forms of memory, technological, in particular in the fields of data science and signal processing and machine learning. So I'm going to start with a digression. There's a book by Argentinian author Borges called Funes el Memorioso. It's a story about Funes, who was a gaucho in the Argentinian Pampa. He fell off his horse and was paralyzed. But the upside was that he had a perfect memory. So Funes perceived a present almost intolerable in its richness and sharpness, of which his brain remembered every instant and forgot none, which sounds really ideal. I mean, we dream of a memory like that. But 2 or 3 times, Funes had reconstructed the whole day, but it had taken him a whole day to do the reconstruction. So that's amazing, but it's not really practical. It bothered him that the dog 314, seen from the side, should have the same name as the dog 315, seen from the front. So there you feel that there's something might be wrong. So this perfect memory is associated with the inability to make abstractions. So the problem of remembering things, it applies to us or to any organism because our sensory systems are constantly acquiring information. So if we keep everything, and I mean the bandwidth, the rates, the information rates are quite high, even for certainly for vision, also for audition. If we keep everything, the amount of information in our brain is going to grow linearly. It's going to go up to infinity. It's even worse for data, in the technological field, because we have exponential increases in rate that are associated with Moore's law. So for internet traffic, the rate doubles every 3 years. But we have the same problem in neuroscience. I mean, Patrick talked to us about the increase in numbers of electrodes that we use for neuroscience. There, it's a bit slower, so it doubles every 7 years. But for DNA sequencing, the amount of data doubles every 7 months. So anyhow, exponential rate. So it's a even more of a problem. So how do we deal with this? So stepping back, so what is memory? So can any of you give me a definition of what memory is? Jonathan, I'm sure you have, or you forgot.
Published papers on memory in non-human primates. And there, all we want to know is whether it's retention of information over time. But you know, there's a difference between recognition and retrieval, right? So you might be able to.
Yeah, but just a definition in a few words. How would you define it? Yes?
The extent to which the past can affect the present.
Okay.
Right, but you could have adaptation, but that might not, that could be unconscious, that it's not necessarily a explicit memory. So you have to define whether it's an implicit or explicit memory, but I think Jonathan's right that, referring to Jonathan Simon, of course, that
So Johnson table over there.
that there's obviously some trace of past that persists into the present, which informs your decision-making process.
Okay, so there are tons of definitions as well that are more or less along these lines. So a simple definition is it's a message that we carry from the past, from our present that we send to the future. So there's this old cartoon of Calvin and Hobbes. I got the letter I wrote to myself. What did you write? Dear Calvin, I'm writing this on Monday. What day is it now? How are things going? Blah, blah, blah. My past self is corresponding with my future self. And bad, you can't write back. So a message from the present to the future. You could also suggest a message from the past to the present. To say, hey, that's the same thing. But it's not quite the same thing. Because it's not the same memory. And so that's a key point. What we call memory is something that it's a moving target. The memory that we have today is going to transform into the memory that we have tomorrow. And so that requires what I call a process. So Florence was a physiologist, French physiologist in the 19th century, said science is not, it becomes. So he emphasized the fact that it's an active, dynamic process. So memory is the same. So my first point is, if you have a theory of memory and it does not involve a process, you have to worry. So why do we remember? So as Jonathan said, I forget which one, we remember so that we can to prepare for the future, to decide, to help construct a plan of what we're going to do in the next moment in time. So you can imagine it as you have this sort of sensory motor loop, but it is informed by input from a much larger store of information about the past. Another question is, what should we remember? And here, theoretically, it's a point made by Schmidhuber in one of his papers, is that we should remember everything. Because every bit of information that we observe might potentially be useful in the future. And thus there's, and it's also very simple. Yeah, sorry?
That seems overly simplistic because it's not just about storage, it's about access.
Okay, we're getting there. So there's no benefit. I mean, if you had infinite storage, infinite ability to access it and to search within it, then you should keep everything. But in practice, there are three arguments against that. why it's not a great idea. First argument is that there may be limits on storage space. Second is that your point that, I mean, the search within a big database is going to be costly. And the third has to do with relevance. So I'll go through these. So storage, it's actually a matter of debate whether our brain stores everything or not. So on one hand, there's the capacity, the physical capacity is enormous if you take into account the amount of information that can be stored by rewiring or substrates such as DNA and so on. But on the other hand, organizing that is going to necessarily be costly in evolutionary terms. Yes?
So today, I know that memories from the past are decaying, and I may or may not trust them today. But if I'm retrieving them, I don't even know if I have a choice. I mean, I'm just retrieving them, and they could be misleading me because I think they're true.
We'll get back to questions like this in
So
a
I think the
minute.
decay is, some part of decay may be more.
Just a quick comment. So you probably know there's a study of super agers with super memory that's been conducted by a group at Irvine. And these people are like foodies. They remember the details every day of what happened minute by minute. And you know, their spouses say it's hard to get into an argument with them about what happened yesterday because whatever 10 years ago, because they know. So certain people seem to have this capacity. Whether or not all of us do, but we just aren't able to access it, it's another matter.
So that was one reason to start with the Borges story, because that was one example of somebody like that. It's a bit, I mean, there are people like that. There's an enormous amount of individual variability. Just one point is that the past is not here to contradict us. So if you remember something really vividly, the question is whether it's actually what you're remembering vividly is exactly the information that was stored at that time or not. It's hard to
But
disprove.
It's like Mind of a Nemesis, you probably know this book, describes a Russian who was shown, and Vygotsky studied him.
Yeah,
He could
yeah.
recall a matrix 19 by 19, 20 years later, tell you each of the numbers in the matrix. So in his case, it seemed like the long-term memory was very stable.
Yeah. But I mean, all of this has to do with these questions. So it's when you read the literature on memory, it's really strange because you have read roughly half of the authors, half of the scholars think that it's obvious that it is possible to store everything, and if we don't remember stuff, it's just because we can't access. And the other half say, well, it's obvious that memory storage is limited. And there's no gradation between these two populations. So anyhow, that's the first argument. Second argument is search. So there's this snippet of the story. Funes knew by heart the forms of the southern clouds at dawn on the 30th of April, 1882, and compare them with the mottled streaks on a book in Spanish binding, he'd seen only one, and with the outlines of the foam raised by an oar on the Rio Negro the night before the Quebracho uprising. So, I mean, this implies amazing memory, but it also implies the ability to search within this memory for conjunctions of three different things. And that's a really expensive search problem. Yes?
Like this for me.
Yeah.
Saying that those people who remember everything from their daily lives do a huge amount of rehearsal and they do not remember everything.
They do not, yeah, well. So I'll come back to questions like this. So the third argument is actually the most interesting. It has to do with relevance. So there's a very simple mathematical argument that you can develop. So suppose that I care about the past, I care about the history and so on, but obviously I must pay attention to what's going on today. So just for the sake of argument, suppose that I attend 50% to yesterday and the days before, and 50% to today, okay? Tomorrow, the part goes initial 50%. Now, I can only attend, I can only give them 25% of my attention. And the day after, whoops, 12.5%. So there's an exponential decay of the amount of attention that I can devote to any bit of information in the past. It has nothing to do with decay. It's a kind of competition at the level of the attention that I can give to this information. Yes? Okay. So that means that the actual information that we're storing is less and less relevant over time. There are additional arguments. You could say, well, the world changes, so the information that I stored 10 years ago is perhaps no longer relevant to today. So that's an additional argument. Yes, gentlemen.
This seems like a different dimension than storage, because you could still have an infinite amount of storage, unlimited storage, but you'd be able to have only a certain.
Yeah. But it does mean that if you have to take into account the cost, and you have to sort of equalize in terms of cost benefit ratio, you might put a little bit less resources on the distant past. So it's something, it's interesting because it's something that we observe empirically. So the top graph is the count of dates within pages on the internet as a proxy for reference to moments in time. And you can see this exponential decrease in the number of references to dates in the past. And you get a similar trends for citations in papers, for papers cited, and it's something that was observed many years ago for in library science. That books over time, they're less and less likely to get borrowed. Yes, sorry?
Perhaps that we tend to be more aware of recent.
Yes.
Is that?
Yeah.
Okay.
And it's simply a competition effect.
Newer ideas. I don't know why this is necessarily relevant.
Why it is relevant? It's just an illustration of this argument. So it's not just a mathematical argument, it's empirically, it fits what we observe empirically. So anyhow, I'll move on. So what is the alternative to keeping everything? Well, obviously it's to throw away some. And so the idea is that we take the information that we stored initially and we summarize it. But it's something that we're going to have to do day after day after day as time moves on. And so essentially the information that we're going to be keeping in our memory takes the form of summaries of summaries of summaries of summaries and so on. Okay. So memory is a process of repeated summarization. So if you have a theory of memory that does not involve a process of repeated summarization, you should worry. So this process, shit, I wish I could get rid of that damn thing. Maybe if.
I was able to move on this one. Why don't you talk and I'll see if I can move it.
Okay, so so you lose information, and so you must make a choice when you throw away information. You have to somehow make the smart choice, throw away the stuff that is less relevant and keep what is relevant. But relevant for what? It's relevant for the future, for future needs. But the problem is that those future needs, you don't know what they are. Like your past self is corresponding with your future self, but you can't write back saying what you need. Okay. So the loss is irreversible, and so you must make a wise choice. And but this process of summarization, and therefore the need to make these choices, you can't avoid it. So how could this work? Now again, that thing. Okay. Now maybe no. No, it's got it. So how can that work? So what I suggest is that memory involves statistics. So one can define a statistic loosely as simply a quantity that describes usually a larger set of quantities. It's a very loose definition. So usually when we think of statistics, we think of numbers. What's nice about statistics is that they have well-known properties and so on. They're very expressive. They've been involved a lot in, there's a whole literature on sensory memory, sensory perception, and that involves memory of, that is described as statistics. And they're involved in really powerful applications, for example, LLMs and so on. So statistics, you can conceive of them as being built on our familiar notions of statistics, like the mean, variance, well, starting from cardinality, you just count things, convex hull, or min or max, power spectrum, but even the things that don't look like statistics, like random selection or random projection, you can understand those as a form of statistic. So there you have examples of a cloud of points that are represented by the mean, covariance, and convex hull. Or you could represent exactly the same data by histogram and so on. So by themselves, you might say, why these things are not really very informative or flexible to describe complex memories, but you can assemble them into structures. So for example, time moves on, you might make statistics of bunches of observations and get a time series of statistics. You can organize them in trees, for example, based on semantic relations between elements, pointers. Dictionary. So dictionary is a flexible notion. Suppose that you want to remember data that consist of these fruits with the occasional bone, and you want to remember them in some sort of concise way. What you can do is you can create a dictionary like what you have at the bottom, contains an apple, banana, cherries, and a bone. Okay, and each time one of these elements appears within the time series of the original data, can increment the count that is associated with the entry of the dictionary. So anyhow, there are lots of there's actually lots of flexibility in this notion of statistics. So next message is memory is statistics. And if you have a model of memory or a theory of memory that does not involve statistics, you should worry. So the problem is that there are lots of statistics. So I mentioned mean, covariance, histogram, and so on. Which one do you choose? And if you're doing a time series of statistics, what sampling rate? I mean, there are lots of little details, lots of choices that you can make. And these are choices that must be made again and again because this process is going on. So there's no clear answer at any point in time as to what is the optimal statistic to choose, but we have heuristics. So this is a list of heuristics that we can use reasonably to make choices between different forms of statistical summarization. So I won't go through all of these elements, but all of these heuristics, but look at the first one. Is this idea that remote information is less important than past information. I mean, than recent information, which is something that it's a heuristic that is automatically enforced by this notion of successive summarization. Okay, because old information has been summarized more times than recent. But there are other ideas like, so there's this notion that, I mean, what we observe is very, very noisy. Lots of things jiggle all over the place. There's the notion that things that are really important, they have slower dynamics. And that's an idea that is captured in a standard method of data analysis called slow feature analysis. So that's another heuristic. Surprisal. Suppose that you have some process that you're observing that has stationary statistics. You don't need to sample it with high resolution because you know the statistics, it doesn't change. But then all of a sudden something surprising happens. This indicates that you have to devote storage space to describe this change in statistics. Surprisal. So anyhow, I won't go through all of these heuristics. I'd just like to point out that there's some overlap between these different heuristics. And they're not all consistent. Like one statistic might say, oh, keep this. And another heuristic might say, oh no, better keep that. So you have a second level of choice, which is between heuristics. Yeah, sorry.
Just one I want to see, ask this before we go on. Are you going to come back to how to choose the dictionary that the statistics are based on? Because that seems like a very important part of it.
Yes, it is. I include it in this notion of choice of statistics. It's I mean, we can talk about it. So what is the question actually?
And so if I'm thinking of keeping memories of things I've had for breakfast over my lifetime, then my choice of dictionary is an intrinsic part of memory that I choose oatmeal and breakfast cereal, but I don't choose French fries or something else.
To put in the dictionary. Okay. So suppose that I'm going to suggest a strategy. Okay. Suppose that you start out at the beginning of your life and you have your first breakfast. One option might be is for every item, you create an element in the dictionary. Okay. And as time moves on, your dictionary gets populated with more and more elements. Okay. Now, as things recur, each of these dictionary entries is going to be associated with a counter that you increment. Okay. So you have a kind of histogram of all the things you've had for breakfast over your lifetime. Okay. At some point, you're going to realize that there are things that you've only had once, and you don't really want to remember them. And maybe you'll find some structure and you see that, oh, there's a cluster of things. Maybe I mean, you have cereal one day and cereal the next day. Maybe it's cornflakes on both days, but it is exactly the same cornflakes. At some point you might say, oh, all cornflakes I can represent by a single entry. So you can imagine this process by which you initially populate with high resolution representation, and as time moves on and you have to put in more and more information, you're going to sort of narrow down, you're going to simplify your dictionary, you're going to merge things that don't need separating. Does that answer your question?
That all makes sense, but it seems that the size of the dictionary and relationships within the dictionary may be more fundamental than the statistics defines with the dictionary, or says the dictionaries. And I don't study memory. Maybe,
Okay.
maybe Chris, would be able to say.
I'll move on. We can come back to this. Okay.
Going on chat. Basically an alternative to summarization. He's talking about the distinction between storage and retrieval. And I guess the question is, does this set of heuristics, are you balancing the storage aspect, or are you?
It's
balancing the
only
retrieval?
storage here. I'm only
Not
talking,
retrieval.
not retrieval. It is part of the equation, but it's to keep things simple. I try to separate the two. Okay, I mean the retrieval. I mean it goes back to that notion of search. You have to find some way of searching for the information. If you keep it, you have to find it, and but let's keep that aside.
Don't you think that should be part of the optimization? If you're deciding how to best commit things to memory, don't you want to worry about if you summarize, if you make one of these choices, that may lose you some information? So
Yes.
should be part of that.
So there's okay. So what I've been describing this notion of successive summarizations. If you keep the intermediate stages, it produces a hierarchical tree of statistics that you can use for search. So there is a connection, meaning this stuff that I'm presenting now, I'm presenting it as addressing the question of storing everything, but it also partially addresses the question of how to find things within that storage. But I don't want to mix the two because it's, I mean, I don't really have time.
And I just want to make one more comment, that not to totally derail your presentation, but I want to just point out, sort of, again, tying in with what Jonathan said, the dictionary can also think of it in relation to language.
Yeah.
So you're talking about recollection of events in time, but something like language, you may persist and may be informative for describing those events. So that may persist and it doesn't tell you. So we remember the gist of an event. We simplify the events over time. Most of us.
Exactly.
But we still, most of us until the very end, retain linguistic abilities to describe those events. So that memory of language seems to be pretty resilient.
Yes, so it's going to be your ability to understand language and understand it in a level at which you can actually reproduce and tell me what you remember. I mean, I see that as part of the memory that is going to persist over a long, long period. I mean, your understanding of language is based on information of language of speech, stuff that you've read over your entire lifetime.
Right.
Much of that you will have forgotten and thrown away, but you're going to keep, for example, you're going to keep the gist of Funes el Memorioso, having read it. You're going to keep something that is you can see as a statistical representation. It's sort of the gist of the story, and you'll be able to tell me the story. I mean, oh yeah, I read that great book, and
But I'm trying to distinguish between explicit memories, like learning how to ride a bicycle. You don't,
Yes.
you might remember the first time you got a bike,
Yeah.
but the details of actually acquiring that skill may be irrelevant. So, I mean, there are people who
Yeah.
have no memory of events. These are people with anoxia in early
Yeah.
childhood. They have no memory of when an event occurred, but they still remember the information that they acquired.
yeah.
So that's an example of being able to retrieve the information with no time tag or no marker.
Absolutely, yeah. I mean, it doesn't contradict any of this.
Okay.
Okay, so yeah, again, you have to, if you have all of these different heuristics, you have to choose which one to favor, and that's a second level of choice that you have to make. And again, it's something that is a choice that you're going to have to make to favor usefulness in the future, but you don't know the future because you can't write back. So you have two levels of choice, heuristics and so just to reiterate, we have this notion of the past on the left, the present and future on the right. So you start with memory at the previous moment in time, t-1. So you take that memory, you somehow merge it with your sensory observations, your present state, things that you have done. All of these are all of that is part of the knowledge that you have at time t. Okay, you squeeze that into the memory at time t+1 now. No, memory at time t, and based on that memory that summarizes everything that happened in the past, you're going to be able to act in the future and so on. And this thing is going to move on in time. Is that clear? Okay. That's not, most people say it's way too complicated. So I'll just, just a interim summary. So memory is a process. It involves statistics. There's lots, so you have to choose among them, and that's guided by heuristics. The problem, there's lots of heuristics, so you have to choose which heuristics. And it's an important choice because it determines the value of what you've kept of the past, and that is going to determine survival, fitness for survival. And it's, well, you say it's too simple. Most people say it's too complicated. It's already mind-boggling. It's vital for the organism. It's sophisticated to get everything right. And it's going to be costly for the organism in terms of metabolism and so on. So I'm going to make 5 points. First point has to do with metabolism. So this memory process that I've talked about, it never stops. And it applies to your entire memory of the past. Everything that you keep from the past, you're constantly reorganizing, re-summarizing. And that is computationally, it's massive. So one could make a conjecture that actually that's what our brain does. I mean, there's this really puzzling fact that the brain uses a disproportionate amount of resources, energy resources, with respect to the rest of the body, and it never stops. Whether we're doing something or thinking about something or doing nothing, it's the same level of energy consumption. So the conjecture is that, well, we do it because of this ongoing process that never stops. Yes?
People would argue about that because
I know.
the main reason for the metabolic cost is that you have to maintain the ionic gradient. Right? So
Yeah, but why? I mean, why?
I mean, you have to have the neurons in a certain state. You're arguing the only reason to have them in that state is for memory.
So from what I understand, the metabolic cost is largely related to firing, meaning that there's information being exchanged. So I mean, I don't have the level of knowledge that you have about the actual processes, but
I think this is a great set of conjectures. I don't have any problem with that. I'm just trying to introduce a little bit of reality. And the reality is that most analysis of the metabolic costs really do involve the fact that you have to use ATP in order to generate the gradient for.
yeah, but the reason why you have to consume more and more ATP is because you've been firing, thus changing the membrane potential. Then you have to crank them back up.
There's series of memory that don't require activity, just have to do the synaptic weights, and then that doesn't.
Yeah, no, but here's the maintenance. It's not the memory, it's the memory maintenance. It's a reorganization. Okay, anyhow, so to develop the or to dig further, you could conjecture that the DMN, the default mode network, is in particular involved in this kind of memory reorganization, and that the reason why you see a drop in activity in the DMN when you're working on a task has to do with the fact that some of the nodes are recruited by the task, Therefore, they're not available for this memory maintenance process unless you see a drop in activity. So anyhow, it's conjecture. So that's the first point. Second point has to do with this notion of statistics. So if what I say is correct, we have to view everything that we remember as a statistical representation. So what we remember is we don't remember any event, you don't remember a vision, an experience, a smell, things like that. What you remember is a statistical distribution that is summarized. It's parameterized by statistics that you retain in your memory. So if you want to recall something, you have to sample from the distribution. So it's a statistical sampling process.
Yeah, that, and it was Lincoln and that Jonathan brought up is that, well, this may be true to some extent. I think there's enough variability both between individuals and types of memory that this is only an aspect. You know, we also, yes, we remember things in the gist of things, but we also remember specific things in general. And then there are individuals who have various capacities within the spectrum.
So what I would claim, I mean, if this reasoning is correct, is that yes, of course, you can remember individual items, but these are selected items. That's, I call these statistics too. I mean, you can, what else can it be?
Yeah, give the alternative
To statistics?
to any of, yeah, to all of us. Yeah, to statistics. If everything is statistics, then there's no alternative, right?
Yes, that's, I agree with it.
Photographic memory doesn't exist. It has to be modeled as statistics and
So-
statistics.
So,
We agree completely.
so I take a photo. This photo is a statistic of itself.
Exactly.
I mean, the fact that I'm talking about, when I say statistic, it doesn't mean that it's a sort of fuzzy thing that's represented by its mean and variance and forget everything else. The statistic itself can include individual items. I mean, for example, one way of representing a distribution is to have a number of samples in it. No, there.
To cover both the fuzzy version and the crisp version, then yes, well, nobody can argue with that. It covers everything.
Sure. I mean, then that's fine. Yeah, yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. No, what statistics, calling them statistics buys you one thing. It's a pathway towards summarization. It's a pathway. So you have your memory today that consists of samples, statistics, everything you want. The problem that you're facing today at this instant is that tomorrow you won't have room for all this stuff. So you need a pathway to somehow summarize. And so the advantage of calling them statistics is that you have this pathway
Is there something?
no, that's why I'm talking about it. Yeah. No, what I'd claim is that it's a rational theory in the sense I'm describing what needs.
Is anybody advocating something opposite to this? I mean, everybody agrees with you.
I know, but I mean, when Einstein came up with his theory of relativity, nobody said that it's not true. Well,
No, seriously.
okay, yeah. So let's move on. So just to reinforce this idea, what it means that, for example, if you want to compare two different things in two different memories that you have, for example, my experience of today, breakfast today versus breakfast sometime in the past, the only way I can compare these two is by comparing distributions. And to compare distributions, you need tools such as callback Libro divergence. You can't make comparisons between the memories, the parameters themselves. because you might have, I mean, one event might have been described with one set of statistics, the other with a slightly different set of statistics. You cannot compare the parameters. The only thing you can do is apply something like KL divergence. So yeah. So yeah, this is interesting, but I'll skip. So third point is that the statistics are involved in many, in many, they're invoked by many papers on, for example, visual perception, auditory perception, and so on. There are many things that everything seems to happen as if we stored statistical representation of what we see and what we hear. Okay, I'll skip all this. I'm just going to try to apply these ideas to auditory memory and what we're interested in. So memory is ubiquitous. Whenever we talk about perception or psychophysics and stuff like that, we're talking about memory. So suppose that I'm studying pitch perception, and I use a pitch discrimination task, such as compare two tones, and the subject has to answer whether it went up or down. When we're doing this, actually what we're doing is we're making a comparison between the memory of tone B and the memory of tone A. And based on this comparison between memories, we did make a decision. And actually, in order to do that, we must also remember the instructions that we were given by the experimenter. So there's lots of memory involved. So that's one point. Another point is that if we look into sensory processing itself at the level of the sensory transducers, like the retina or the cochlea, take, for example, cochlear filtering. You can model cochlear filtering as, well, filter, which is a convolution. Convolution is a weighted sum of observations. That is a statistic. So you can see that as a first initial level of statistics that is calculated, is applied to the raw data. But then you have additional levels, like, for example, in most psychophysics, classic psychophysics theories involve the power within each cochlear channel. Okay, so that is the second level of statistics applied to the initial weighted sum at the output of the filter. So you have power spectrum, autocorrelation, cross-correlation. All of these are statistics. Okay. And you can go one step further, look at the modulation spectrum, or even the second order modulation spectrum. And Josh McDermott has taken this even a little bit further by proposing a number of statistical measures that he claims account for perception of auditory textures, like rain or bubbles or wind or stuff like that. And it's something that is, I mean, it's an idea that is embodied in ideas such as the scattering transform of Stéphane Malat, where you have levels of, so you form an initial statistical representation, then you take statistics of these statistics, and again like that in an unlimited way. As you move up in the hierarchy, you get something that is more and more abstract and compact, so on. And actually, there are a number of experimental results that you can explain based on this kind of idea. The idea that the memory over a longer period of time is going to involve representations that are more abstract, less detailed than over a short period in time. So I won't go into the details of this, I'd just like to just like to mention work by Munya, also on statistics. Also, I mean, how can I say? In order to account for what is going on in the, or for the kind of phenomena that are probed in this type of experiment, you have to make the hypothesis that the actual representation is statistical in nature. So, I'm sorry, I'm going a little bit fast. So how does this relate? How might this relate to auditory attention detection? So I'll make several arguments. First argument is to paraphrase Sam, our models suck. So what do I mean by our models suck? Here's some data from that Ed showed us yesterday. So each line is a different type of representation that each step, each improvement in the representation improves the amount of raises the correlation score, but the correlation never goes beyond 0.1. 0.1 correlation means that you're accounting for 1% of the variance of your data, which is not much. So you could say, yeah, but there's noise, there's other things going on within the brain. True, but maybe it's not just that. So second argument.
Finish that sentence, so.
Yes?
What is the argument here? So we are only capturing 1% of the variance.
Meaning that we don't have a good model. So we don't have a good model.
Of what?
Of
Input?
Of what we're trying to get at, which is, I mean, if we had a good model of what is going on within the brain when we hear a speech, for example, we should be able to make a better prediction of the EEG that we're measuring.
Is the argument here that we're missing the context, the memory?
Okay, I'll get to it. I'll get to it.
Len?
Yes.
Just, I think this is a little unfair because EEG, Ed said this yesterday, EEG covers so much of the brain.
Okay, I'll just move on just so that it'll make sense. So the second
Goes up to 0.3, 0.4, and also 0.6.
Well, okay, get back to it. So the second argument is that what we measure with the EEG, it's a macroscopic result. I mean, in order to be able to see it, it has to reflect something that is happening to gazillions of neurons. Now, neurons are smart things. They're capable of representing information. Why do you need a massive amount of neurons to represent essentially a few bits of information? Okay? So that's the idea that maybe what we're observing is not actually related to the information itself. Maybe it's related to the processes of managing this information. So here's another conjecture, that the macroscopic EEG events that we do observe represent memory maintenance. So imagine this process of, so the information comes in, speech information comes in, it is going to be summarized by statistics that are themselves going to be summarized by statistics. So you have several levels, several points in time where you're going to have to take the observations and squeeze them into a summary representation and throw away the rest. And this concerns multiple levels of representation. And you can imagine this occurring at given points in time and involving each time you do it. So you have a whole bunch of observations that you summarize, represent by a small small number of numbers. You throw away the original stuff. You have to, there's some garbage collection or something like that. So the conjecture is that what we are observing in our experiments, trying to model auditory response to speech, has to do more with the garbage collection than with the information representation. Okay?
Thank you.
Thank you.
And
No, I just want to get some clarification. Because you said several times, that you go back, you have to put these in summaries, and you're throwing things away. I want to take issue with that. Maybe you can say that there's any one of those things that were detailed before, they can be recovered. And I believe that. And we have evidence of that, a lot of them. So you may not remember it, but you could be, for example, it's embodied. And you do something later, and all of a sudden it pops out of something from 10 years ago, 15 years ago. And so I don't know what's actually thrown away, since whatever trace is there can be reactivated and made strong. And I don't see anything wrong with it.
Yeah, so you belong to one half of the population of people interested in memory. You're a Marmite lover, and the other half is Marmite haters. Yeah, I mean, there's a bunch of people who believe what you believe. There's another bunch that think, I mean, it's obviously wrong.
But if you can recover something, then when does it get thrown away?
But
Whatever you
are you sure that it is kept? So, for example, look at your computer. You store tons of stuff in your computer, and but over time, would you say that everything is still there? No, it's the resources of the computer have been reused for some other purpose. And it makes sense. It would be silly to keep everything.
Let me give it that.
So why would our brain be sillier than a computer in that respect?
I don't know. But I do know that you may not, you say, I don't remember that at all. An event that happened, I don't know what I ate for dinner 5 years ago. But there's a lot of evidence that this has been embodied, and it literally comes out. What it does, it comes out on the table of massage, right? All of a sudden, somebody.
Yeah, I mean, yeah, but that's hand waving. I mean, hand waving, embodied. Okay, it's embodied, but I mean, I'm talking about stuff that is embodied in the brain, and I'm trying to figure out how. Just saying, yeah, it's there. It doesn't really answer the question. But so, yeah. Well, let's talk offline. Yes.
When you are talking about is a statistical model or statistical thing we are processing online, we are talking about statistical model built in or statistical model we are acquiring during our life.
So when I say it's statistics, it's the you have to assume that it takes the form of statistics because you need to be able to do all these operations on it.
It's built like when we work, like it's built in our brain.
So what is built in our brain is the ability to handle these statistics and to do the summarization process. There may be additional information that is built in, but yeah, okay.
Chris had a comment.
I'm trying to.
Oh yeah,
How to get.
can people hear me? If I'm
Go ahead, Chris.
Oh, thank you.
Oh, we're not hearing you. Oh, wait a minute. I know why. Wait a minute. Try now, Chris.
Can people hear me?
Yeah, but we didn't plug you in yet. Hold on.
Okay.
Yeah. Sorry. I was trying to get your face too, but I can't get that.
Okay.
Hold
I don't know if you need my face. I actually shaved my head because we have not only hand, foot, and mouth disease, but also lice. So just living in the medieval times over here.
Okay, Chris, go ahead.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah.
Yes.
Perfect.
Thanks. Thank you very much for the talk, Alain. I just wanted to mention this idea of kind of a hierarchy of statistics. One of the things that I've been thinking about a kind of hierarchical representations for a long time, and I had a very similar kind of view my view was shifted a few years ago, like maybe like 4 or 5 years ago, when we ran an experiment, just asking people what made two memories similar for them. So we ran a like really large sample experiment where we had people recall events from their lives, and then we asked them um, which other events in their lives were similar to those events. And we ran these experiments in many different ways and thousands of participants, and I'll spare you the details. And we scored the events in terms of how close were they in space, how close were they in time, what semantic features did they have in common, um, did they have people in common, etc. And after many years of these experiments, the two dominant features that make people consider two memories of theirs similar, and also what leads one memory to prime another memory for real world memories. Number one is the emotional character of the memory, and number two is the goal, the kind of purpose of the activity that was involved in the memory. And this really shifted my views to think that at the top of the hierarchy isn't just an overall process of statistics on statistics on statistics, but there's some kind of self and self-relevance kind of factor at the top of the hierarchy. And I think that actually maps on in some ways to that DMN, um, neural activity you were mentioning, because that DMN activity is not only associated with memory, it's also associated with representation of kind of self, and it's kind of this merging point of situational representations and goal-related representations. So I just wanted to mention that, like, I think this hierarchical idea is quite powerful and it ties into what we know about the brain, but we also need to find a way to start formalizing this kind of fuzzier stuff to do with like um, kind of self and value. I feel like it seems like that's quite an important part in what we actually end up retaining over long periods of time.
Okay, so I don't see it as contradictory. I mean, the way of merging the two pictures is to simply say that what you call emotion, for example, is part of the observations that are stored in memory. So you store, the same time as you store your observations, sensory input and stuff like that, you store your internal state. It includes your emotions, actions that you have performed, rewards from those actions. So you store those, and you also store the correlations between these things. So part of what you remember is not only that it was sunny that day and you felt good, but the fact that this connection between, hey, nice weather and feeling good, it's I mean, that too is stored in memory. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I mean, in terms of storing the features, I do think it makes sense that we do store all of that. I just think that in terms of what you were describing as the memory maintenance process, I suspect that these goal and emotion related features may actually be more important, especially in that respect, like the things that we decide to prioritize.
Yeah, so that would be one of the heuristics involves balance, I guess. I mean, emotional balance and stuff like that. So it would direct the summarization process would be biased by this kind of thing. But you would also remember that. And you could remember, for example, in a statistical way, in a summary way, the fact that in the summer of, I don't know, 2002, you were particularly happy. So you're not remembering each of the happy events, you're remembering the gist in a sort of summary way. Does that make sense? Okay.
Giovanni, while we switch computers, Jonathan had a question or comment.
This question with Chris actually, so you may be familiar with a couple of papers by Jeremy Wolf, where he claimed that auditory memory is much inferior to visual. And you know, that then applies to more cortex devoted to visual processing and comments.
Right.
But I'm just curious, if what we in terms of trying to understand auditory memory, why is it more limited than visual?
We're not.
I mean, yeah, it's a sort of orthogonal question. I mean, there are lots of differences between the two because the bandwidth of the information that you have to store is different. So obviously, chances are you're going to have a little bit more space devoted to visual memory. Also, I mean, there's a concept, I make a distinction between archiving memory, which is what I've been talking about, and so-called working memory. And there too, the rules are different between working memory for vision and working memory. But yeah, there's zillion differences, but they don't have a strong bearing on either.